Hey everyone, Dr. Klein. We're going to go over the diaphragm and the pelvic floor connection and what we can do chiropractic wise and just stretching and how the spine is compressed in certain areas related to what the diaphragm is doing and what the pelvic floor is doing and some of the things I see on the day to day, because simply breathing, activating your diaphragm can really change everything, lengthening the spine, taking stress off the nerves, helping digestion, gut motility, all those things, and essentially just supporting all the structures, because everything is healthy depending on how we're breathing. Are we using our shoulders to breathe? Are we actually using, our diaphragm, expanding the rib cage, engaging the hips to help everything be healthy and more stable, because the spine is stable. So we notice if the areas are locked up, and there's probably a problem with the diaphragm or the pelvic floor or those hip flexor muscles that are all connected. So one thing I'll do is I'll stretch the diaphragm and then hold the C3 through 5 area, because that's where the phrenic nerve to the diaphragm is from, and we'll just notice changes there just breathing. Instead of holding that, I'm just going to put this wedge there. So if you're checking your patient, you want to check those 3 levels, see if there's a spot that's really sticky or stuck or compressed in that area. So that's what I'm going to do right now. I'll be right back with you. Get that here out of the way. So that thing's called a cervical orthosis. Next thing we're going to do is going to check the diaphragm area. So diaphragm attaches to L1 to 3, and it also attaches to the ribs here and the xiphoid process on the sternum. So you don't really need to dig that hard. You want to be nice to your patient. And I'm feeling a little tighter on the left. So normally I'd cross over to the other side just to get a better angle, because I'm usually pushing out this way, but I don't want to block the camera with my butt, so we'll go this way. What I'm doing here is we're bending the hip, and that takes some tension off the hip flexor, iliopsoas right here where it attaches to the diaphragm. So relax your leg, give me all your weight. Go ahead and take a breath in. So as we breathe in, the diaphragm should flatten. Go ahead and breathe out. You don't have to hold it. Just give me a couple of those big breaths in and out. As we breathe in, the diaphragm should flatten. That's to allow the rib cage to expand, the lungs to expand. And we're just kind of pushing down and out to help that diaphragm along. Sometimes it's so tight and bound up that it doesn't want to go. And again, you can do this while holding the neck with one hand and the other, or using the wedge. I just like holding the neck because you can really feel the change and the decompression in the neck happen as you're doing it. Another way to know which side to target is you can bring both hands overhead, and if one arm is shorter than the other, that's the side you probably want to hit. So you think about just the hip flexor being tight, it's going to laterally flex you to one side over the other. So let's put that down. Good. Still pretty bound up, more on the left than the right, so we're guessing that's to be the short arm side. And you can go by feel, you don't have to do that. It's just magical when you show the patient that, like, hey, look, your arm's evened out. And they just think that you're just pulling harder than one side or the other, so relax that leg. Get more into the psoas here. Let me drop that hand right there. Again, just kind of dragging with my piezoform into the muscle. They'll feel like you're smashing your organs, but you're not pressing that hard. You're just getting that muscle, and that's a big muscle. Another thing you can do is as she breathes, you can pull the leg down. So inhale, and you pull the leg down as she breathes out. If you're in the passive type stretching, kind of bring that hip flexor into an eccentric position where it's lengthened. And you can have her as she breathes in, Breathe out and pull your knee towards your nose. So on the exhale, they're pulling. And then relaxing on the inhale, pulling on the exhale. Some will do this for a count. You can like have them hold for 6 seconds and then stretch it for 8 seconds. It's another way of doing it. I like the breathing because breaths are more important than counting. A lot of times when they count, they're holding their breath. They think, oh, I'm gonna pull. This way they're while engaging, then relaxing. A lot of the exercises we do, that's what we train to exhale as we're lifting. All depends on what you're doing there. Let's check the muscles. Much better. We're gonna work that right, or the left side a little bit more. I'm gonna come around and get that. Get a better angle on it. So now you can't see that too well. Just able to drag better with my hand if you're on the opposite side. Breath in. Breathe out. Too much. Breath in. And out. You can also use a massager if you're feeling like they can handle it. Not everyone can. This is kind of tickly. Definitely don't hit them in the ribs. You're right below the ribs. Really gentle pressure. So the iliac attaches to the lumbars. And they form one big muscle. Iliacus portions here, attaches on the inside of the pelvis. So they're both hip flexors, but they kind of help with internal rotation of the hip, which is this way, depending on how you're holding yourself. And then they run and attach into the trochanter, lesser trochanter. Again, you can use the leg there. Relax that. This is kind of like a vibration plate too, where you're standing on it. So pull your knee to your nose. Pull your knee up towards your face, which is hard to do with that vibration. Really challenges the muscle to work under a load. And the point of that is training the muscle to work right. You don't want that muscle shortened. We want it working correctly. But this can also decompress everything and lead to symmetry. So we're going to check the neck, see how it feels. Get her off the torture wedge here. It's called the cervical orthosis. Best investment because you can put this in the car too behind your back. Great for the neck. Help restore your cervical curve. Usually after I do this, I'll do a little decompression maneuver in the neck, finding where they're stuck. She's right at C4 here. And just giving a little pull, keeping the curve in the neck, trying to open it up a little. Good. Little movement there. So now we'll work on the pelvic floor. So roll over on your stomach. So obviously we can't get to the pelvic floor, but we can work a muscle called the sacrotuberous ligament. I guess it's not a muscle, it's a ligament. So that attaches bottom of the sacrum here to your ischial tuberosity, which is also where your hamstrings attach. Hamstrings come up and attach here, right where the sit bone is. And then that tendon runs across. And that's pretty tight on most people, usually one side over the other. Sometimes just putting pressure into there can help someone with a headache. So we're feeling how the sacrum's positioned. So we might do a couple stretches here. Leg length can tell you a lot too, because it's usually a little tighter on the short leg side. So instead of doing a correction, we're just going to do a stretch and see if that evens the leg out. You even feel that pelvis is kind of tilted downwards. So we're finding the ischial tuberosity, getting my thumb in there, kind of scooping up and pushing out. Up and out. And you can do this while they're laying on their side too, because I like to take that leg and kind of stretch the hamstrings a little bit. But just sometimes just the pressure here is good. If there's too much tension from the hamstring, you feel like you can't get in there, you can bend it, and they will feel that you can get a little deeper in on that muscle. And just go into the side like that. When I first start, it's kind of more up, and then I'll slowly push out. Pelvic floor is important for the gut because the rectum has to go through it. Think about the diaphragm, the esophagus is going through that, along with other things like your aorta and all that, blood supply. But hiatal hernia can be related, to the diaphragm, just as like inguinal hernia could be related to poor pelvic floor, core activation. So both really important structures, not just to contain the organs, but they comprise your foundation, what your spine is supported by. All right, let's see if that evened the legs out. Yeah, looking good. So evened out just from that, right? We don't even need to adjust anything. Another little stretch I like for that, and it kind of relates because her hip flexor was tighter on this left side. Kind of just lock the SI joint down with your hand before you stretch. So you lock that down, and then you're just bringing that knee up. I'm not trying to bend the knee. I'm really just isolating that hip and kind of bringing that knee close to the body. And that's really the only way to kind of get that psoas stretch while they're laying down here. They might feel it more in the quad, depending on how much you bent the knee, so you can relax the knee a little bit more to isolate there in the hip. And again, you can breathe in for me, and then push your knee down into the table as you breathe out, kind of activating that iliopsoas, P&F stretching style. Relax, stretch it a little more, back up from it a little bit so you don't want to be stretching them too much. Bring it down a little bit to allow her to activate again and push the knee into the table. So go ahead and push again for me. Do it for a few second count here. Keep breathing though. Always encourage them to breathe because they'll forget. And then relax. And what you'll notice is you'll actually get more stretch out of this than you will if you're just tugging in there, digging in there. It will start to let go. So it's that activation, relaxation, stretching. That helps. And you can feel that change always in that SI joint. So sometimes instead of always adjusting the SI joints, cracking everything, because that can lead to instability sometimes, just stretching. Really align the pelvis nice if there's instability there. Everyone loves the pops, but so she's got more of the cheerleader posture on, and then what you'll see there is these QLs and erector muscles are really tight, attaching to the ribs, because what's on the other side of this? Remember, diaphragm. So L1, 2, 3 right here, and everything above that, where the diaphragm's attaching into the ribs, very tight. So pretty much everyone needs work here. We'll just work it with the hypervolt. Try not to kill her. Not really on the spine, but just off to the side a little bit. And I'm noticing the right side's tighter, and that's just kind of how it works. You'll have the iliopsoas tight on the left, whereas the the erector and QL tighter on the opposite side on the right here. I also noticed that piriformis, which is kind of above sacrotumus, external rotate of the hip right here, tends to be tighter. It can be tight on both sides, but it tends to be tighter opposite of the sacrotuberous ligament. So if the leg is short in extension and also short in flexion, that'd probably be more your sacrotuberous tightness, and the sacrum would be tilted. The apex of it would be off to the right because the piriformis is pulling, the triangle shape of that sacrum off to the right, and you'll notice that right hip is a little tighter. The stretch I'll do for that while they're laying down here is kind of the same thing. Bend the knee, but you're going to bring the hip out to the side a little bit. And then I'll just put her knee kind of on top of my knee and just kind of guide it and grab the ASIS on the opposite side just so she doesn't roll too much. Kind of work it in there. I really got to kind of pull up and down, just guiding that hip. And then lifting a little bit. Fun. Better. And that actually helped that muscle up there. Get a little erector spinal stretch. Because if you're struggling with getting movement in the spine, you might want to do some of that first. It's a rotation move here. It's also good. Just rocking that rib cage. Sometimes it'll pop on its own. Don't force it though. I can feel that it's not ready. There's a lot of imbalance that needs to be worked on. Last thing you want to do is just be beating them up. So we'll try just a light little move here. Breath in, breathe out. And what we should be doing when we're working on the decompression stances, you should feel it stretch here because we're trying to lift upwards. So this area will flatten a little bit. It's not going to flatten completely. We don't want it to flatten completely. And then if she lifts her head, lift your head up, she activates the posterior chain here. That's how it should be done. So first we got to engage this, then they lift the head. So put it down for a second. And sometimes lift your head, get a little movement because they're helping you out. Let's show you the side stretch here. So why don't you lay towards me on your left side. So you can hit a lot of different things. Hamstring, piriformis, just supporting, not where the hip joint is, but right on the pelvis. That way you lock that SI joint down. And then I'll just kind of hold the leg with my leg. And we can just torture that hip a little bit. And this helps put the hip more in internal rotation. Sometimes you could beat on a muscle all day long, but if you're not putting the joint in the correct position and then working the muscle, it all relates back to one of the early videos on mechanoreception, the body's mapping system. And then since that right erector is tighter, you can have him put the hand behind the head and then just stretch him a little bit like that. Gets the lat, gets everything there. You just feel that tightness in the rib cage. That's what you want to work through with the breathing exercises. There's always more a patient can do for themselves than you can do for them. You just teach them a little bit, because then they can work on it all day, all week long. You just got a few minutes with them or an hour with them. Every breath could be working against that restriction. And when they're doing it, not only are they breaking up restrictions, but they're strengthening. And that way it will stay there. And that's the best of both worlds. But we're just trying to help them along as best we can. Even if they don't listen to you, they might get it eventually. Lats, so the rotator cuff. You can kind of get subscap a little bit here. Push that elbow that way. Open it up a little. And that's all will work for there. We'll do a little adjustment here. Since this was tighter, we're just gonna, right on the SI joint where the sacrum is, lock that down and just roll her a little bit. Good. Little click there. Kind of putting that triangle bone back in the center. It also stretches that muscle a little bit. And that should hopefully help this hip function better. But that takes a lot of time too, because these hips are just so used to being externally rotated because these muscles are pulling. So if there's tightness, there's probably weakness too. So lay on your back. So remember, she was tight left, so it probably needs more strengthening on the right. It's tight muscle, there's a weak muscle. A good exercise you could do there is bring both knees up. Get them a circle band. So when she pushes with the other foot, this one will be pushing against the band, and it'll actually be strengthening. So the one you're working on is the one that's not moving, because that iliopsoas is going to have to hold that knee at 90 degrees while the left one is pushing. So that'll actually stretch the tight one while strengthening the other one. Another one you could do is have them drop the leg like that and just bring this up, stretching the one side and then stretching hamstrings on this side, right? Get over the shoulder. That's usually how the balance works. Hamstrings, piriformis tighter on this side, psoas tighter on the other side. In some postural patterns, you'll notice it's just tight on both sides. Like if they're really posterior tucked, probably means the hamstrings are tight because it's pulling us this way. Probably weak psoas on both sides. So watch out for that as well. Do a little neck adjustment. Good. Check those ankles. Tight ankles, tight hips. Good. Good movement. You're having trouble with the extremities, stretch them out first. Sometimes the patient will experience knee pain, not actually feel pain in their spine or their ankles or their hips. And that's because the knee is trying to do the job of the spine and the hips. I don't really ever blame the knee. A little tighter here. Got your peroneus longus brevis, extensor digitorum here, tibialis anterior. You could roll that with a foam roller. So that can really lock up the foot, externally rotate the foot, make you walk on the outside of it. So loosening that up, rolling it on the foam roller is good because you're doing an exercise then, like a jackknife it's called. And that's great for your hip flexors. So she's tighter on that one side, right side. Which probably means her calf on the other side. Once you find one tight muscle, you can just guess. She's groaning, she's letting me know that, yeah, that is tight. Because you gotta ignore the patient sometimes when they tell you what hurts. Not when you're massaging them, but they're like, this hurts, work this. I feel like 9 times out of 10, that's the area that's sprained and injured. Trying to convince them of that is hard, because you're always working on the other side. It's like, one hurts there. Even working on my colleague the other day, and he's like, the pain's on the right. And I'm like, but it's all tight, and it's sticking up on the left. So, adjusted the left. And sometimes the pain will go away, because remember, we're not magically healing what's injured. We are just taking the torsion and the twisting out of the spine, and then there's less stress and less pull, which is probably what caused the injury so easily to begin with. Think about it, your spine is twisted like a towel. Eventually, you probably can injure it pretty easily, not even doing something that crazy. So we just untwist it, and sometimes if the injury's not that bad, you'll be like, oh yeah, it's 100% better. There's still injury there. You need to be careful, you need to strengthen. Simply breathing can help that. Breathing exercises, just like we did with her. Pulling that diaphragm down, breathing, inhaling, expanding, opening everything up. You can feel that stretch in the rib cage, especially for me, I'm more the cheerleader too. My pelvis wants to be anterior, and I want to push back, and I think that's just good posture. But no, I gotta, because those erectors are so dominant, they control me, so I have to shut them off by engaging that hip flexor more and then lengthening up out of top of it. And then when I breathe, I can really feel all that restriction in my spine that I don't feel here. I'm like, yeah, my spine feels good. I don't feel any restriction. Yeah, because you're breathing from your shoulders and you put your spine in this bent position. So it's what you know that matters.